Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board, and tonight I got USAGI in the mail, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. I'm pretty excited to get this and give it a look over and tell you what I think of the product. So first things first, the form factor. That seems to be a thing that we talk about now. Black Hops is a pretty standard format for a trade paperback or an indie comic. It's got about 60 pages, I think, a story, 60 to 80 pages, something like that. They're not numbered, so I can't say for sure. I forgot to go back and check the details on the Indiegogo campaign, but it's soft cover, it's square bound, as you can see, pretty nice quality. The paper stock is very good. The cover stock on Volume 1 feels a little flimsy, at least when compared to Volume 2, which seems to be of a higher quality. I'm not sure if these came from different printers. They both have this Iconic Comics logo on them, so I'm not sure what the difference was. It's not a really noticeable thing. It's not low quality. This is about what you would expect from a Dark Horse book. I don't know, something like a DC book might be better quality. I've only seen DC trades in hardbound because I mostly just get those from the library. That's what the library buys. Anyway, form factor seems really good. Nothing to complain about there. There's nothing crazy in the first volume. I should note that the second volume is a little bit different. It's actually a double book, or however you want to think of it. There is one story that runs in the book this way, and then there's another story you can flip the book over and read going the other way, and they meet in the middle. That strikes me as kind of gimmicky, but it doesn't really detract from the book in any way. It's still a good quality book. Like I said, I think this cover stock is of a better quality than what there is on the first volume. The pages feel good as well. And, you know, it's not a huge gimmick. They didn't play into it too hard. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as I talk about the story. But overall, I think it's really good. So let's talk about the stories. If you're not familiar with Black Hops, it tracks USAGI, or Usagi, as I believe it's pronounced, which is the U.S. Army found a rabbit in the ruins of Hiroshima as they were surveying it about a month after the bombing, and they found that it had seemingly superhuman, or more accurately, super lapine powers, and a soldier adopted it and kind of brought it home as a pet and turned it into, the Army eventually began using it as a super agent. So if you're not familiar with Nihonga, Usagi is Japanese for rabbit, which is why I believe USAGI is supposed to be pronounced that way. And I'll be referring to this central character, the rabbit, as Usagi for purposes of this story. So this Volume 1 is a pretty straightforward story. The bunny is in retirement because his handlers have all left the Army and retired, and no new one has come out of the family that he's kind of adopted as his own. But North Korea is preparing for a missile launch. Here you can see one of the generals discussing it with his supreme leader, and the bunny is sent out to, Usagi is sent out to scuttle the missile launch, which he does successfully. This is a pretty good introduction to the idea. It shows you all of Usagi's powers. He can change his fur coloration. He's super strong. He's smarter than a rabbit, not as smart as a human, at least supposedly. I would say he actually has the intelligence of a young child. That's about where I would assess it. He can communicate with animals. Pretty interesting set of stuff. The story is very touching at points, where it emphasizes the rabbit's relationship to its owners, and also the way it interacts with the tiger soldiers, which are these Korean soldiers who have tigers that they use to hunt down intruders. And there's an interesting dynamic between the rabbit and the white tiger here. I'm not sure how you pronounce her name, and I'm not going to try to because I'll probably butcher it. But that was interesting. The art is good. It's very expressive. It leans a little bit on the cartoony side. So if that's not your thing, maybe this isn't the best book for you. But I like it. It really tells the story well. The things that look realistic, like some of these firearms, they look pretty good. At the same time, Usagi and many of the other semi-intelligent animals manage to have good facial expressions. You can see that on the tiger here, that really convey their mood, since a lot of this story revolves around animals that cannot speak. Giving them a certain amount of expressiveness is important, and you can kind of see here. Here you see the connection between Usagi and the white tiger as they communicate with each other via Usagi's superpowers there. And I think that's pretty good. If I had one critique of the art in this book, it's that the panel layout is kind of bland. It's largely square panels or rectangular panels. Or splash pages, and there's nothing wrong with that, but the characters never seem to break out of panels. There's no angles to emphasize action or anything like that. It's good serviceable panel layout, but it's nothing special. So that's book one. Book two is where the story really starts to get interesting. So one thing I should mention in book one is at the end, Usagi fights the Tatzelworm, which is a cryptid. I'm not familiar with the background of the Tatzelworm. You can see it here. It's kind of like this weird snake-cat hybrid, and it spits acid, and it's intelligent and very strong, much like Usagi. Supposedly it was created by the Tungsta. I'm sure I've butchered that name as well. The Tungsta event, which was credited to a asteroid bursting in the air over Russia in the early 1900s. The exact nature of how that might have changed the Tatzelworm is unclear, and of course there's the fact that the Tatzelworm appears in folklore going back to the 17th century. That also kind of throws a wrench in it. And here in Black Ops 2, Hair Trigger, we expand on that. And this book is a lot less straightforward than book one. And in a lot of ways, that's a good thing. There are really 4 stories in this book. And they have, I found them to be compelling in different ways. They're all pretty good. My favorite is the story of Rigger Tortoise, who is, you see right here on the cover at the bottom. He's a tortoise with some kind of cybernetic upgrades, and I'd really like to know more about how that happened. Unlike Usagi here and Patriot R, which is this sea otter here, Rigger Tortoise is not... I can't say superhumanly. What's the best way? He doesn't have an elevated intelligence. A lot of this is tied back to radiation changes in the creatures, as both Usagi and Patriot R were transformed by nuclear radiation. And the villain, the chief villain of the piece, Apex Moth, who you see here in the background, is a scientist who has been studying this phenomena pretty much since Usagi was discovered. And here we have Hair Trigger, who is basically she's a mercenary, and she likes to collect pelts from animals she's killed. So pretty good villain for Usagi and company to face as well. So there are 4 different stories in here. They all revolve around Apex Moth attempting to escape his imprisonment on Hart Island and Long Island Sound around New York City. And so one story is there's a setup where they establish Apex Moth and Hair Trigger. Then there's the introduction and then it splits into 4 stories. So we have USAGI Usagi going in for to destroy the operation that Apex Moth has running and recapture him. And you have Rigor Tortoise, who's doing his own thing. And one of the things I really like about this book is that on most of the pages, going through Usagi's story, there are actually 2 stories going. You have Usagi here, and then at the bottom there will be just one of these little panels showing you what Rigor Tortoise is doing. And it's actually a lot of fun to flip through the story and just keep checking in on the turtle and seeing where he is as he slowly makes his progress towards his own objective. Now, when you flip it over, the other 2 stories, one focuses on Penelope. What is the surname? I don't have her name right off the top of my head. Let's check real quick. Penelope Freeling. I'm not sure which it is. I'm going to go with Freeling because that sounds better. So one of these stories is a short focusing on Penelope Freeling. That's kind of interesting. She goes and she takes on one of the creatures that the doctor's modified. The other one is Patriot R. You get his backstory and you see his side of the mission on Heart Island. So each of these is interesting in a different way. Rigor Tortoise is really amusing and charming, and he's just doing his own thing, and he's the clutch player. I like that. He comes in at the last moment and he really makes the clutch play that keeps the situation going badly out of control. Penelope's is interesting because you get to see things from the human side of the human's good guy side. Usually the humans you see in Black Ops stories, at least based on these 2, are the bad guys. Apex Moth, Hair Trigger, and of course the North Koreans were all human. And they were the humans that were in the story the most. Getting Penelope's story kind of gives you the human side of things and gives you a better understanding of what else could go on and what the human consequences of Usagi and his friends failing are. Patriot R's story is interesting because it gives you, it lets you see the new kid on the block. Like Usagi is an old hand. He gets along well with others. He's a seasoned, commando bunny, and he's good at what he does and knowing how things are supposed to come out. Patriot R is the rookie with a chip on his shoulder who kind of goes about doing things his own way. There are several points where, just based on my reading of the mission briefings as they're given in the story, he kind of goes off the reservation and brawls with Apex Moth's men more than he really should. So that's kind of fun to see. And of course, Usagi's story is at the heart of it. He's the one who confronts Apex Moth and Hair Trigger and drives a lot of the exposition forward. You don't learn a whole lot about the character in this story. Like in Volume 1, it was all about setting up Usagi, giving you his backstory, telling you how he connected with humans and why he continued to work for them. There was a lot of heart in that, and there's not as much in this volume, which is unfortunate because that was one of the most charming aspects of the first volume. A lot of that kind of goes to Penelope and for the human elements, and for the charm that goes to Rigor Tortoise, who is my boy. So you don't really get a deep look into that character as such. What you do get in Usagi's story is the promise of a really interesting premise as the franchise moves forward, because I'm sure we're going to get more of these books. And what they introduce is the idea that Apex Moth is weaponizing cryptids and selling them as biological weapons to the highest bidder. Tatzelworm came from Apex Moth, and you can kind of see him in the background here on the cover. That's a nice touch for continuity's purposes. If you had read the first one before this campaign, I had not. So that's pretty neat. And it also hints at the idea that Apex Moth is weaponizing all these different kinds of cryptids. In this story, he's threatening New York with weaponized chupacabras. There's mention of a couple other cryptids that he's produced and sold on the black market. And that's a very interesting idea going forward. You have super animals versus, monsters of myth and legend. And I think that will be pretty cool. And this Usagi story really sets up that plot element. Both Apex Moth and Hair Trigger have the potential to continue to come back into the story, as does Tatzelworm for that matter, as recurring villains. That's really good. And this cryptid versus super animal conflict is well set up for the future. So hopefully we will see more of that in upcoming stories. I would like, well, I think the gimmick, if you will, of having these different stories that all kind of come together near the middle is really good. I would like to see the storytelling perspective reunified and presented as an organic whole in future stories, because I feel like this book has given us a good appreciation for the Black Ops team, the 4 different characters, and now I really want to see them working together more in future stories. Art-wise, pretty much the same critique as before. The panel layout, at least in Lim's art, is not particularly fresh. I mean, there are a few innovations, like you can see Hair Trigger is kind of busting out of her panel there, and things like that. There are some angled panels, as you can see here, but still a lot of it is these kind of blocky layouts. And I understand those are very easy to lay out. They're very easy to plan around. And it's not like these are grid layouts. So there is that. But it feels a little safe. I would like to see a little more exotic panel sizes and shapes. Maybe some insets, characters bursting out of panels. Lim has a very good art, and he does a good job of outlining his characters, so I think they could very easily break out of panels and look organic. Just a thought. Also here, this page in particular highlights something that I felt in a couple of places, like 2 panels didn't necessarily flow into each other. Here you have the kid or the general crouching by a headstone, and then up here you have Hair Trigger pointing the gun over at him. And I think partly because we have this dialogue balloon here saying, "Burke, I'm going to kill you," it really felt disconnected to me, and it wasn't until I went back and I reread it and I got down to this panel here where you can see the general's hand slumped from behind the headstone that I realized, okay, this was the same thing. Because for a minute here I thought we were going to switch to a scene of her executing the guy who let the general get away, especially because on the previous page one of the guards says, she'll kill us all, or she'll kill us. And then this guy says, "Relax, Burke, this is an island." So my first thought was that she was talking to this guard, Burke, here, and it was really jarring. I didn't know what was going on. Maybe that's partly the writing, I think art-wise, it could have been fixed if this panel just pulled back a little bit and let us see the top of the general's head or something in the frame as well. Just a thought. I don't know if the creative team has a person that they show roughs or inks of panels to get feedback to see if they flow clearly. But I mean, that's just something I would have said if I had been going through it. And maybe it just threw me because of the dialogue. Maybe they did have someone like that, and just including this line here, even though I believe these broken up word balloons are supposed to indicate that it's radio comms as opposed to speaking to the person in front of her, it's still really confusing, especially given the dialogue on the previous page. I was not sure what was going on real quick. I don't know if that's writing. I don't know if that's art. I don't know what. That's my only critique, nitpick, I think. Again, I do feel like this story was a little fragmented and was kind of unsatisfying to have, less story focusing on any one character. And, there's something to be said for exploring all of the characters from Usagi's point of view, and there's something to be said for doing the story this way, where we get a little bit with each of the characters. Whether you like it or not will probably be a matter of taste. Personally, I did not like it quite as much as the first volume. Again, I think that's more of a taste thing. So, overall thoughts. I bought this because I saw a review from Mim Headroom where he praised the first series, because I believe he bought this as individual volumes. And Mim Headroom really liked it. He liked the passion that was in the project, and he liked the innovative storytelling through the art in this. And I think all of that is very true. And I think that's the strong selling point of Black Ops. The strong black mark, the strong negative, this is the thing that will provoke the strongest negative reactions. Let's go with that. The thing that will bring about the strongest negative reactions is the fact that the main cast are all super animals. Not everyone's going to like that. It's kind of a premise that we think of as reserved for children. Although, I mean, if you've read the Redwall series, 100% not true. I mean, Redwall is billed as children's literature, but let's face it, it's just good reading. And I think that Black Ops has the potential to fall in that same space. So far, it's doing pretty well. I don't think it's at quite the level of Redwall, but Redwall is kind of a classic, so maybe that's not surprising. It could be, though, and I would like to see it get there. I think the big thing to focus on will be getting back to a little bit of that strong visual storytelling. Characters in this spend a lot of time talking directly to Usagi. I mean, they know he's hyper intelligent and he can kind of understand them. But I don't know, having all that dialogue directed to him, it almost feels like it's just characters talking at him. I don't know. I didn't like that quite as much as the really quiet, for lack of a better word, interactions that he had with wildlife and the humans in Volume 1. And you actually see a lot of that in Patriot R's side of the story, where he's just going around and he's knocking the snot out of people. That's pretty cool. So maybe that was just partly the writing. I'm trying to squeeze some exposition on what Apex Moth is doing into this volume. But I would like to see that come back, because that's the part of the story that really sets Black Ops apart, I think. So that's what I think, and hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, there's a like button and subscribe button down below. You can use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.